This is a Media Lab podcast.
Whoa! What are you doing here, man? Is the podcast over? The machine's broken.
No. Machine's still turned on. I just have its guts kind of pulled out from here because I know I put it somewhere.
What did you put what where?
Do you know the movie City Slickers?
Yes, with
Are you
Billy Crystal and Daniel
Jack Palance? Are you familiar with the sequel to City Slickers?
City Slickers 2? Slicking in the City?
Search for Curly's Gold.
Curly's Gold, sorry. I thought it was Slicking in the City.
City Slickers 2, still slicking. No, it's the search for Curly's Gold, and I know I put the gold in here somewhere, so I'm searching for it.
You know what you need? You need an ass map.
A what?
You need a map that's been hidden in someone's ass. It will help you.
In his own garage, Kyle has built a machine, cobbled together with parts found in his friend's church basement and a dumpster behind the local Dairy Queen. This monstrosity is now alive and evil. Kyle has convinced his friend Dave to help stop the apocalypse by reviewing films the machine picks. The ultimate purpose is still unknown, and Kyle could have probably done this himself, but he's not being dragged to hell alone. This is Kyle and Dave versus the machine.
Welcome to Kyle and Dave versus the Machine. My name is Kyle.
And my name is David.
And I'm the machine.
A podcast where a sentient machine forces us to watch movies in order to prevent it from initiating the apocalypse. Although, we do tend to talk about the ideas of the movie rather than the movie itself. Today, we're going to be watching the movie Three Kings.
Are we shooting people or what?
Yeah, I can see a grain of sand in there.
I think this guy has a weapon!
Music is high, and the spirits are soaring as these young... Did I just say soaring?
Sir, this scene is restricted, sir.
Get out of my way.
Sir, Mayday! God dang it!
Good afternoon. What do you see here?
Bunkers, sir.
What do you see in those bunkers?
Stuff they stole from Kuwait.
I'm talking about millions in Kuwaiti bullion.
You mean them little cubes you put in hot water and make soup?
No, not the little cubes you put in hot water to make soup.
Is this like a Christmas movie?
Yeah, that's right. Going to... I wish I could pull out Kings of...
I don't remember the
words. This is me singing in church.
Let's move on. All
right.
Before this becomes a musical podcast.
Dave, what is your background history with Three Kings?
I don't know. I think George Clooney's in it, Ice Cube, and Marky Mark. And that's all I got.
So that's about it?
I know it's soldiers, and I feel like I've seen it, but I couldn't tell you what it is about. A heist. I don't know. Something like that.
Why not? I remember it being talked about pretty extensively at the time. It was definitely a movie I actually wanted to see back in 1999. I don't know if I've told you this before yet, Dave, but the theater in my hometown burnt down when I was a teenager.
What?
Yeah, I know. It's crazy, huh? And I just never got around to it. And I don't know why I never tried to go and watch that in the intervening years. Just have never done so. I know at the time, though, I can speak to it, that there was actually a lot of people disappointed that this movie was not nominated for Best Picture. That they thought that it should have been. There's a lot of critics that thought it should have been nominated over some of the other choices that were nominated for Best Picture that year. It definitely made me excited to see other stuff by David O. Russell. More on him probably later on in this episode. And this was, I also remember, even though he had been in other films to this point, this was really George Clooney at the beginning of his career trying to be a movie actor, because I'm pretty sure he was still on ER at this point, or maybe just coming off of his run on the first few seasons of ER.
Yeah, not that I've done any background research, but yes, I think ER ends in 90. I didn't watch ER. I don't know. No. Doctors? Who gives a shit about doctors?
I was a teenager. Like, I'm going to watch a doctor show.
Fuck off. Yeah, they save lives. Let's move on. But apparently he had already done From Dusk Till Dawn, which I had not.
And Out of Sight, probably, I'm going to guess?
Yeah, J-Lo. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I was surprised in my research. That's a Soderbergh movie, which I didn't realize at the time.
Soderbergh goes all over the place, doesn't he?
He's
never,
there. Yeah, he's
figure him out.
like a ghost.
He's all over the place. So that's basically all I know about this movie. I know that it's fairly well regarded. I know that it is a war movie of some kind. That's about it that I know about this movie. But so I'm excited to jump into it. So let's do that. Let's go and thank some sponsors. And then when we return, we'll be talking about Three Kings. Hi, everyone. Just Kyle breaking into the podcast again to tell you about some of our lovely sponsors who help make this podcast run as efficiently as it possibly can. And I assure you we'll be right back to supporting that military-industrial complex very, very soon. But before that, let's keep suckling at the teat of capitalism. Kyle and Dave vs. the Machine is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode is brought to you by Unbelts, the Edmonton-based biz that makes the comfiest stretch belts around. Unbelts also makes cloth masks. You're going to need more of those, whether you're heading back to school or just living in a city that requires masks indoors or on the bus. Unbelts masks are designed by serious perfectionists. The masks follow all the latest WHO guidelines. They're ethically made right down to their components, but most importantly, they're super comfortable, even if you have to wear them all day. Unbelts masks have elastic straps that go around your head instead of your ears, though you can add an optional ear loop too if that's your thing. They've got a nose wire that keeps your glasses from fogging up. They've got a waterproof performance shell on the outside and an organic cotton lining inside, and you can put a filter in between. They come in all sorts of colors and 4 sizes, from preschooler to adult extra large. They've been featured in Parents Magazine, Elle Canada, and were even named Best in Edmonton. And guess what? Unbelts is a certified B Corporation, which means their business is all about giving back. All September long, for every mask and kids belt they sell, they'll give a mask to Alberta schools in need. I think this is such an incredible boon to have them as a sponsor here this week. So what are you waiting for? Head to unbelts.ca to order your masks today. Shipping is always free, and you can enter the code APN for a free mini laundry bag just for Alberta Podcast Network listeners. Or if you're an Alberta teacher, you can click teacher discount on their homepage for 20% off your entire order. Once again, that's unbelts.ca and enter the code APN. This episode of Kyle and Dave vs. the Machine is brought to you by the inaugural YEG Podfest. That's YEG Podfest, presented by Edmonton Community Foundation in partnership with the Alberta Podcast Network and LitFest, Canada's non-fiction festival. Running October 1st through 3rd, the festival will be held entirely online this year, so anyone can experience it. Events will include masterclasses with experts, panel discussions, feature interviews, and more. And if you need an even bigger sell, I will be on one of those masterclasses to talk about how you can use podcasting in your business. How could you say no? Some of APN's podcasters will be part of these events. Again, refer back to me just a few seconds ago, with guests from around the world. To check out the full lineup, head to yegpodfest.ca. Can I just say, and I want to actually talk about this more, I'm actually most interested at the fact that this is about the first Persian Gulf War. I think it actually has a lot to say about...
Oh, you mean ever?
Maybe some.
No, wait.
No,
year.
not ever. But it was from the first Iraq War.
Oh, right.
That's where this movie takes place.
Yes,
but,
okay. I didn't understand the words that were coming out of your mouths.
But thumbs up or thumbs down?
Yeah, up. Yeah, up. Yeah, I don't know. It was pretty good. You know what? I was surprised by all of the different tones of the movie. Which that's
a very David O. Russell thing.
I was going to say, yeah, I probably should have expected that since I've watched subsequent David O. Russell films. Mm-hmm. But I was surprised, like at the beginning montage of this sort of hysterical Americana shit, and I was really put off guard. And by the end, I don't know, it's okay. Yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty good. It was fine.
Pretty good.
Yeah, it was fine.
Well, let's get through some of this information. So Three Kings was released on October 1st, 1999. The other major release that week was Mystery Alaska, written by David E. Kelly, directed by Jay Roach, starring Russell Crowe, Burt Reynolds, and Colm Meaney. Three Kings currently is rated 7.1 on IMDb. It has an 82 on Metacritic. And then over on Rotten Tomatoes, as of 129 critics' reviews, it's at 94%.
Wow.
And the users, 186,122 of them, give it a 77%. So both positive, but I think there is a pretty big division there between like how enthusiastic, say, audiences were versus how enthusiastic critics were. It is available on DVD or Blu-ray. You can buy or rent it on iTunes. You can also rent it on Google Play or YouTube. And in Canada, you can stream it via the Stars app. That's Stars with a Z.
That's how you know it's classy.
Its budget was $75 million. I have to imagine that's like explosion budgets and getting Clooney, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what Clooney was asking price
looked like
was
they were
at that point.
somewhere, in the desert. So
its budget was $75 million. It opened to $15 million. Domestically, it would make $60. Internationally, it would pick up an additional $47 million, bringing it to a total of $107. So depending on what kind of, algebra you want to do, that's either like a very modest success or a modest not success, failure. So $165 million with inflation is what that comes to. Its plot description from IMDb is, in the aftermath of the Persian Gulf War, 4 soldiers set out to steal gold that was stolen from Kuwait. But they discover people who desperately need their help. It stars George Clooney as Archie Gates, Mark Wahlberg as Troy Barlow, Ice Cube as Chief Elgin, and Spike Jonze as Conrad Vig.
that was the most surprising part. Two surprising parts. Spike Jonze
was an actor before he directed.
Well, he wasn't actually. He was already directing, but I would never have expected him to play racist bumpkin. So
racist bumpkin, yeah.
And then, did you notice Alia Shawkat was the daughter?
Oh,
yeah. She came out, and I was like, that looks a lot like a really young Alia Shawkat. And then I IMDb'd it, and it is her.
I'm going to just leave this without comment. I'm just going to say everybody actually has a first and last name except for Ice Cube in this movie.
Listen,
he's only known as Chief Elgin. So I'm just saying.
That's his name, Chief. That's not I'm pretty sure that's not a title.
That's his real.
That's
not
his
a
rank.
Real first name is Chief.
I think so. It's not a rank. Isn't his rank sergeant?
I guess so. I guess there is no chief designation in the army.
No.
So that makes it even wilder to me that his first name is Chief.
Thug's life.
I guess that's coming from a guy who's named Ice Cube, but whatever.
You get in trouble now. You get in trouble now.
It. By the way, what kind of cool, interesting stuff did you uncover from these 4 actors in your write-up over at Patreon?
Well, without getting into too much detail, like Tom Hanks, George Clooney is apparently a fucking saint, and likely, posthumously, there will be some drama, because there's no way a person can be that perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, he's like fought for civil rights, been in woke films. There's no dirt. Even like his bacheloring, there's like no gossip. There's nothing. So if I had
to sign like affidavits or something like that, they wouldn't say
plausible.
anything.
I mean, Leo's not getting away with it. Everybody makes fun of Leo for the 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
But he's married to a human rights activist lawyer.
I know.
He's winning.
I dated George Clooney briefly in the early 2000s.
But it's the longest write-up because he's done a lot. He's done a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff.
He's even directed Oscar-winning. I don't know.
This is what I will say about George Clooney. I guess love him or hate him, he is the most similar to me to Jimmy Stewart, in that Jimmy Stewart basically played the same character, I think, slightly elevated or understated, but it was really like a very limited range, I think, that Jimmy Stewart had. But I always love seeing him in a film. And I think George Clooney is very similar to me, which is I think he has a very limited range that he can do, but I always enjoy when I see him in a movie. That's how I always feel.
Yeah, I think that's a cynical way to put it. I agree with you. I wonder if it's also a statement of this concept of charisma. Like we talked, I think, in one episode about John Malkovich or right. Tom Waits, or there's some people that they're just themselves and the movie works around them. I mean, even Keanu Reeves, again, love him, hate him, have an opinion about his intellectual capacity. I'm pretty sure he'll pass the cognitive test, but he's not he's not a full range actor, right? He's not going to portray the Joker and then harm himself. But I was thinking about that too when this movie started. I mean, it's clearly Danny Ocean's backstory.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
When it starts off.
100%. Yeah.
But that being said, yeah. So that's Danny Ocean and Ice Cube's Ice Cube. It's not a full write-up because his history is insane.
Come on.
Yeah. And I didn't want to go into the music side just a little bit just because of his roots. But
you did spend most of your write-up on Mark Wahlberg's music side. You have to.
Listen, it's the Funky Bunch, and he's peddling good vibrations. The thing about Marky Mark is, I had no respect for him at the beginning. And when I was doing this research, I realized I probably like 70% of the movies he's made.
I know. It's so wild.
It's so weird.
I don't know if I enjoy
him.
This is so awful to say. Like, I don't enjoy him, but for some reason I like the movies that he's in.
Yeah, I can't really like
weird.
The other guys. I actually liked the first Ted, and like Daddy's Home. It's a terrible movie, but it's hilarious. Like, I don't know. Pain and Gain. I got through that piece of shit. Like,
wow.
I don't know. But he's got quite a lot. He's got history, man. He's not a particularly nice person.
I feel
in his youth, I should say.
Was this kind of the start of his, like, I don't know, dramatic acting stuff, or had he been in a bunch of stuff before this?
He's always, I don't know, that's the weird part. I think he started in drama and then got into comedy because I'm just trying to remember the sequence, but I mean, The Departed's after this, but
yes, yeah.
I mean, he was in The Fighter. He was like, it's weird. If you look at his I think comedy's later because I think judging by his youth,
was he in many movies before 1999?
He's in, I don't have it handy, but before he's too young. I think. Yeah. Was it that stalker movie? The Neighbor, whatever. What was that thing?
Swim Fan. No, I don't know.
He was in that. I don't know. I've never seen it, but he's in one stalker movie, which I'm pretty sure is before this, and something else. I mean, he was an underwear model. The big thing for him is apparently he was in the original New Kids before he left.
Really?
And
before Donnie came in,
he was with his brother.
Oh, he was?
I think they started it, and then he split, and then the other members came in after, which I thought was weird.
I was such a Jordan fan.
Wow. And then that's on public record now.
I don't care who knows it. Jordan Knight, call me up.
And then apparently Donnie Wahlberg, who's got his own issues, produced Marky Mark's first album, which I think it should make sense because they're already blown up, but he brought good vibrations to the earth. So, come on.
Good vibrations just means drugs. But
well, you know what? He's got addictions in his past, racism, homophobia. Now apparently he's redeemed himself. He makes he makes movies with BIPOC. That's a thing now, right? That acronym. So he makes movies with black people. So he's made some progress.
Great.
That's on record too. Yeah, this is going to be.
I don't know. I don't trust them. I don't trust them, Dave. And then Spike Jonze, of course. I mean, I know him more as a director. But he did obviously like tons of.
I remember his music videos.
Music videos and stuff.
Because that's
like that.
my era.
No, he did direct one of my absolute favorite movies of like the last decade, which was Her. I love that movie.
Still haven't seen it
a lot.
Yeah,
it's great. And we'll cut out the part where I said that he directed a movie that he did not actually.
No, you
direct.
won't. No, you won't, because that would lose the veracity of this recording.
Sure.
I grew up in the 90s, so I watched every single one of his music videos without knowing that he directed them.
Yeah.
And when I see the collaboration list, I'm like, I've had all of these albums because yeah.
This movie, of course, is written and directed by David O. Russell with a story by John Ridley. I don't know how much I really want to spend on this, but this is very early in David O. Russell's career. Yeah. So he'd done Spanking the Monkey and Flirting with Disaster. Yeah. Flirting with Disaster is the better reviewed movie out of those two. So this was his third that he was doing. But then he would go on and kind of become a big success where it meant a lot of his movies, the actors would either be nominated for or win Academy Awards. And he actually holds, they're all big. And he also has a distinction of being one of the few people to direct a Best Picture nominee 2 years in a row. So back to back.
You got to add that into my write-up. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah. Which was Silver Linings Playbook and then American Hustle. So those were the 2 back-to-back movies. The biggest thing that people will know about him is that A, he's a huge jerk, and B, he cannot take a joke when it's made about him. If you've heard the Mike Birbiglia story that he's told on stage about saying verbatim what David O. Russell said about Lily Tomlin on the set of I Heart Huckabees, you know that he did not take that criticism very well up on stage.
Well, I read that George Clooney punched him in his face during the shooting of this movie.
I could see that. Yeah. Well, you can see that very few actors work with him a second time.
Yeah, with the exception of...
there has been some.
Yeah, Jennifer Lawrence.
Mark Wahlberg did, because Mark Wahlberg was a...
Yeah. What are you going to say to Mark Wahlberg? You guys share the same values.
Right. You said that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a link for some reason, I think intentionally, probably in hindsight, there's a link with Harvey Weinstein, whatever that pig's name is. I think just before Three Kings. So I don't know if Harvey's got a producing credit on this one, but for whatever reason, Wikipedia highlights that they met. And interestingly, David Russell's disappeared from Hollywood for the last 4 years. There's no projects. Yeah. There's nothing listed. I think he's in hiding. Yeah, apparently the story goes he was physically and verbally abusing the set staff, and George Clooney, because he's a fucking saint, was like, you can't do that to these people. And then apparently David Russell headbutted him, and George Clooney punched him in his face. That happens, apparently, on a set of a movie.
And that's set of a movie. Yeah, it's wild because, I'm not going to say what he said, but you can watch the video. They've released it of what he said to Lily Tomlin with what I'll say, with Dustin Hoffman sitting right next to her and him being like very passive, like maybe you shouldn't say that. Like he's very like non-committal to back her up.
You know what struck me is like Hollywood culture is that Lily Tomlin almost apologized for that incident.
I know.
And that might not be her core, but how else is she going to work in that industry and that era if she doesn't make it her fault? That's so fucked up. But that's where we are. We're starting to learn that apparently men don't respect women. It's strange, Kyle. These things we're learning.
He's just trying to make her understand how this picture works, though, Dave.
Ugh.
Anyways.
Yeah. So he can go fuck himself. But he makes good movies.
That's David O. Russell. And the worst thing is that I do have a love-hate relationship with his movies. There's actually a few that I really do love.
Yeah.
And a couple that I really actually hate, that I don't like very much.
Which one do you hate? Which one do you hate?
I really don't like Silver Lane's Playbook. Straight up. Don't think that's a good movie. I actually think it's actually made poorly. But anyways, that's me getting up on my soapbox. Dave, I know you already said it was a modicum of support to this movie. Why don't you go into a little bit more depth of what do you enjoy about this?
Well, in light of everything we said now, I can't... No.
Yeah,
number one, I think it was, let's say, gripping. That's a strong word, because the tone keeps evolving, which is nice. I mean, right from the bat, you get that anti-war, sarcastic, satirical vibe, which, for me personally and the times we live in, immediately kind of hits this note. It is a little bit hard and very 90s the way they do with the sort of frat boy, celebrations and shit. But as they leak little things, like, for example, that none of the characters have actually been in active duty, and that, and that was a big story. I remember when I was young, that a lot of these war veterans coming back from that particular Gulf War, and they were often spending 2 years or whatever their tours were just sitting.
Feels a lot like this podcast.
Because it was like it was one of the first big media wars. There was not the amount of action that movies would portray. And when Danny Ocean shows up, and, they've got the butt map, and they've made their crude dark comedy jokes about the shit and all that kind of stuff, I started thinking it was going to be an Ocean's 11, because, they're going to go on this heist. And so I was like getting all excited about this sort of, I thought it was going to go like full comedy. Ice Cube and Marky Mark.
For a moment there, I was actually right there with you. I thought that this was going to turn into like, oh, that's interesting, like a war heist movie. I haven't seen many of those before, so I was like, that's cool, let's do that. And then it went into something completely different.
And that's the thing, like in 99, nobody knew that Marky Mark and Ice Cube were actually be great comedic characters.
Right.
That's the lens I see them at now. So I thought this is a great cast to have something where they're going to be silly and do stupid shit, and it did not do that. I thought it got muddled, not because of poor directing and writing, but that situation is so muddled. So like the first time you see soldiers and the people, like it's so, I think that's the intent, that it's so gray, and nobody's right and nobody's wrong, and you see this American greed, and I don't know. It got very.
I think I'm along there with you for the most part. Although it sounds like I might be a little bit more positive on this movie than what you are. I could not help but watch this movie with like two brains going on at the same time, which is like, boy, what would this have been like to watch in 1999? And now the impossibility of doing that, because it's like, well, how do you look at this movie with the knowledge of what was going to happen in a few years from 1999, and how what they're talking about in this movie was like so eerily prescient about what would be American policy in 3 years. So I think that there's this really interesting thing that's going on. First and foremost, I said this at the beginning, but to really put this into context, like, there are so few films made of the first Gulf War. I looked it up, and this is Wikipedia, so I mean, I write in if this is absolutely incorrect. But I think grand total, there's been like 15 movies made about the first Gulf War, and they list them all out.
Anything of note? I can't even think of one.
The
Jarhead?
only
No, that's the second one.
No.
Yeah.
That's the second one.
Yeah.
That's right. Like all the ones that we can think of probably off the top of our head are second occupation, because they started making them really quickly.
Yeah,
even while that was going. Well, I mean, it's still going on, but I mean, like very soon after they were going on. I can't even remember like a popular one, honestly. So it wasn't really made about, which I see as being maybe a comment on really the 90s of being like, shrug, whatever, war's going on, but I don't really have to, I don't know, lock into politics or anything like that. It seemed like that was a justified war, even though this movie is showing, hey, there's a lot of crazy shit that's going on here that we should really reckon with as a nation. And then they weren't able to until 9/11 kind of happened afterwards. But I'm just talking about like the idea about blowback, about going into a country, invading it, and not setting it up for success, and then leaving. Of course, people are going to be mad at you. There's like that whole subplot of the guy who's torturing Mark Wahlberg about like, listen, like you dropped bombs and killed my family. Like, how else am I supposed to react to this? And it's like, oh God, like I guess you're right in that sort of thing. I have no idea, by the way, if this story is actually based on a true story, like whatsoever, or if it's like completely made up. It did feel a little bit like America rah rah a little bit. By the end of it, it's like Americans always do the right thing, don't they?
Yeah.
But the last thing before I throw it back to you, it was also hilarious to me that the song that they're dancing around to after like they're done fighting is that "Great to Be an American" song that played like forever after 9/11 happened. You know what I mean? Like that became
true.
an anthem.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's just like, boy, does history repeat itself here if as they were constructing this movie. So I think there is a bunch of stuff that can be delved into as far as like America's foreign policy, how this impacted them going into it, and how much different the reaction from the public was, and I guess what Hollywood's reaction was to it, even first Gulf War versus the second. So I don't know what you have to say about that.
I just keep thinking whether I'm misremembering this, but you know, I do have this thought that when I was in high school, this war was not a justified one. And I remember we used to read Maclean's and Times magazine, and all the articles, like I was mentioning earlier, were about how they had these ships, they're firing missiles into this area. Nobody knew why. Everybody was talking about how it was about oil, and it wasn't about freedom or peace. So it wasn't a lack of acknowledgement, at least in my memory, that this war was George Bush the First's sort of political, if not ruse, at least stratagem for, let's say, economics, international who knows, whatever the motives are at that level of politics. I wonder if the difference is social media. I have this feeling that at that time in the 90s, like we kind of talk about how we're just noticing in 1999, there are cracks where people are starting to be aware that there's an underlying problem with the culture in America, but this is still considered the zenith.
Many war films, I would say the vast majority of war films are basically come down on the side of like anti-war. Like it's like, this is not a good thing we're doing. Especially the Vietnam War films, and I think a lot of the Iraq films too. But what I think we've already discussed this year is 1999 feels like and maybe the years leading up to this were the same way, but definitely in 1999, it's like these cracks are starting to form in this idea about American exceptionalism. At least the people that are making the entertainment content, it seems like maybe we should question this idea that America is the best all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if we continue to delve into the history of film, intellectuals, pro and anti, let's say in this case, America, will have their opinions in general, and they will be reflected in art and expression. But I think the advent of the sort of democratization of news through social media has changed the way that Hollywood feels obliged to present itself. Maybe that's a way to put it. So I wonder if in the 90s, even in the face of, like, I'm pretty sure it was already somewhat known about the US's involvement with, Noriega. I mean, bin Laden wasn't on the radar yet, but Hussein, all of these despots that they actually built to control previous wars and lost control of. And this is the thing that I might be wrong. These may be narratives that came out after bin Laden. So I can't remember if I'm mixing up my personal history with this stuff, but it is fascinating to see, a humanization in a way in a Hollywood film of the impact of war on both sides. I mean, it is super cheesy, but even the way that the American soldiers, George Clooney has to make an ethical divide, because in the beginning he's shown as a disgusting reporter fucking, ne'er-do-well, as they would say in the Shakespearean era.
Yeah, no, don't pronounce V's ever.
No, I mean, V's are the devil's consonant. And so he goes from, in the span of 2 and some hours, from this guy who has no ethics and morals, who wants to steal his gold for himself, although so charming. So you don't get this nefarious thing where he's going to kill Ice Cube and Marky Mark to get it for himself. And in the first interchanges, he's like, no, fuck all these people, fuck those soldiers. Let's just get the gold and get out of here.
And go.
And in that one moment, in this case, spoiler alert, Alia Shawket's mother unfortunately gets shot in the head for no reason. He makes this ethical decision, which then becomes this next spiral where the movie leaves any comedic route and becomes, this social, political drama. And, they show these weird underground movements and this kind of like almost Miyazaki style gas mask. And like the whole thing becomes very surreal, but also couched in fact. I mean, Saddam Hussein was famous for hiding all of his personal wealth in bunkers and having these collections of cars. That's become a bit of a meme, if you will, as the youth like to say, of all dictators.
Yeah, Saddam Hussein would eventually be caught in a bunker. I mean, like all this stuff was so,
or was he?
Prescient about what was going
twins.
on. Or was he?
Right, there were clones.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
Of course there was. I overuse this analogy, I know, sometimes, but they're at least in that section where they are in that small village going to the bunker, it did turn into like a mini Western in my mind.
Yes.
Like the people come into town, they stroll into town, and then they understand like, no, we should actually save these people rather than like go after like the
bale of
bandits
hay
sort of
and
thing.
somebody going
right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, so that's what it kind of felt like. And David O. Russell is known for like just basically slamming together genres and styles and tones, and that sometimes puts people off of his films. Puts me off of a couple of his films specifically. But I mean, for me, it works. Where it's like it starts as war film, satire, kind of gets into this Western thing. There's like kind of this rescue plot, and like so there's all these different things kind of being thrown at the same time. But I have to say, I was like always engaged with what was going on. Do you feel like there is, though, a point? He wrote and directed this movie. Is he trying to comment on anything, or is it just like, oh, this is going to be a fun movie to put on in October of 1999?
From what I've read about David O. Russell and looking at his movies, I don't think he aims to make fun movies. It seems like everything is a either intentional or unintentional psychological exploration of his own fucking problems. Like there's like that tension where he's kind of throwing his own trauma and his own conspiracy and his own sort of thought process into this writing, which when it hits makes it, I'm going to use a word here, mercurial, which gives him a lot of credit, but there's an alchemy, and there's a lot of great words today. There's an alchemy what happens when you're willing to be that vulnerable. So you put out...
Is that a thesaurus that you have in front of you? What's that?
Yeah, I just scribbled it in my hand. I said, words to use. I've been spending all week accumulating the vocabs. I mean, I think this is it, but I think it's doused in, of course, woke politics and all this stuff, in the 90s sense, where he's trying to show that we aren't good guys and none of this was a just war. But the main thing is this exoneration of evil behavior by just doing the right, like being a Nike sponsor, just doing the right thing.
Right, like one good act somehow makes up for all these other devilish things that have been going on.
And that's the thing at the end that kind of pulled the plug out for me at the end. I mean, it's not that it's done badly, and it's not that I don't want redemption for, let's say, Marky. I mean, so I had to give credit to Marky Mark. It's like in the torture scene, he's actually fucking fantastic in that moment.
Yeah, right.
You watch that. I'm not sure how he didn't die from being fed gasoline, but that's a whole other. We won't talk about the plot per se. I mean, it looked pretty clean for someone who is just being forced.
Well, it was premium fuel, so I mean that does clean the undercarriage a bit.
Or motor oil, whatever. It was black, so maybe it's oil. I don't.
It's straight up oil. Yeah. I eat dinosaurs for breakfast.
So, well, we are in Alberta, the dinosaur capital of the world. I mean, he makes a point of showing the burning oil fields, which is a big news issue back then because it wasn't about oil. They were just burning the things in Kuwait. And that was a whole environmental news piece in that era. I think it's about his own personal redemption. Maybe he's acknowledging in some way that he knows he's a prick and he just wants to have a character that has this opportunity to save a village full of people who are suffering for no reason. And that's also a storyline that doesn't exist anymore. This idea of, a small village in an Arab state, affiliated with terrorism, where everybody there is actually a naive, innocent, even if the rebels, good person looking for good American ethical values. That's become very muddied too. In all the shows and movies we watch now, there's always more dissent and more conflict even within those stories. So
there's a few things I guess I want to pick up on here. I think that there's a bunch of different plot threads that kind of all feed into this theme, because I think one of the other major things that he's trying to get at, what David O. Russell is trying to get at, is that there is this mythology that happens with wartime, with soldiers in particular, and potentially about the first Gulf War specifically, because again, this would have been 6 or 7 years removed from when that conflict was being fought. But there's a moment at the very beginning, specifically, right? They find the map in that gentleman's ass, and that's how this adventure starts. But then as they go around the camp, that story starts to slightly change. And so it's it was in his nose, and it's this is where he found it. And then there was a similar thing, because the very first scene is Marky Mark killing that guy, shooting him in the neck. It's oh yeah, his head entirely popped off. And what struck me was boy, that's a really interesting comment on how a mythology is built up, how tall tales are begun, where there's probably this element of truth and then wild speculation, and then that becomes the story, that becomes the truth, just because it's repeated so often and so forcefully. That's how good wars are labeled the good wars, because of the stories we keep telling ourselves. And I think that's why they have the Nora Dunn news reporter there too, where we see her kind of slightly, not necessarily making up facts, but definitely shaping what the story is behind what's going on. And I just think that's an interesting feature to put into this movie, where it's we're showing you in this movie what's really happening, quote unquote, what's really happening, but is it really happening? I think that there's this meta narrative that's going on about can you trust what is being presented to you? And the quick answer is you can't. But I mean, I think that's an interesting thing to infuse into a war movie. I don't think that's normally what people are trying to do.
I like that. I forgot this thing though, in terms of us rewriting, because we're better directors than anyone.
Yes, especially me. I mean,
well, I was going to say
they call me an actor's director. Really, that's where I excel.
They would just call me Oscar. No, so when you brought it up, I vividly remember them, but it's not what I take away from the movie. And I wonder if there had just been one more moment to remind us, or if, in the epilogue, I hate how that was a thing, but in this epilogue sequence where everybody's happy and they all make it. If there could have been one more reference to how the entire story we watched might have been an exaggeration of something, like, you know, shooting a rocket through a what looks like a oil tanker and it turns out to be filled with milk. I mean, there are these surreal moments that are comedic, weird, because they're not really contextualized at all, and then they disappear. Whereas those two moments in particular were very deliberately put into the movie. And even Spike Jonze' character, because he kind of is the centerpiece of that myth creating. By the end, when he's shot, it's just, his character is just, it's weird. It gets a little weird. I kind of lost.
This was the hardest for me to grapple. Like, it's not that Spike Jonze is doing a bad job with that character.
Just why is the character
I kept wondering, like, why is he here? Like, why is, like, the racist white guy the person that we're kind of seeing this movie through the lens of sometimes? And I actually enjoyed the fact that Ice Cube was there to temper it, because there's some pretty strong racist language, and he's like, no, and he shuts that down.
I mean, it says David Russell's from New York, Manhattan, so maybe this is just his way of poking fun at the redneck South. It may also be a comment on, you know, where the soldiers enlist from. I mean, there are interesting statistics about the source material of the Army. It's no accident that in Canada, you know, Alberta, East Coast, they funnel so much of the youth into the Army, but you don't hear as much about it in urban centers.
I guess the one interesting thing about the plot of this movie, and maybe you can think of other examples that I'm just blanking on, but very few times have I seen a war movie where the soldiers are so actively trying not to ever be in the Army anymore, because that's kind of what their goal is, like, get the goal so we can leave the Army or leave the military, where usually it's like, this situation we're in is shit and it's awful and we want to get out of this situation, but they're still like
pride.
You know, proud to be around with their brothers and, like, you know, joining that war cry. But this one is more actively like, we don't want to actually be a part of this apparatus anymore. I'm sure there's probably some Vietnam movies out there that are similar and stuff like that, but this is,
I mean, you know,
one of the few that, like, I think it's a slight, like, semantic argument I guess I'm making here, but it seemed like it was a little bit different than normal setups.
You could, you could throw the MCU universe where the Falcon and all these guys are dealing with PTSD. I think PTSD has become a mainstay in Army movies, but like you said, the narrative is not so much about people running away or trying to get theirs. I think that's fairly unique. I mean, us thinking that this was going to be an Army heist movie, the way that it sets up and its reputation, or not reputation, but how I imagined this movie was going to be without even getting into the first scene. It feels unique. I definitely don't know how many Army heist movies. I mean, you watch the Five Bloods. I haven't seen it yet. Presumably there are some parallels to this. I think it's about 5 soldiers that come across a bunch of gold and go back to go get it.
Movie idea: The Five Bloods 2, The Search for Curly's Gold.
But there still is that brotherhood of them being there. I think that they are such a kinship between them all. And this one feels much more like, we want to get this gold and get out and never see each other ever again. Like, there's that kind of difference.
Yes.
Before we wrap this up here, it seems like the kernel of the theme here is this, like, interaction that George Clooney has with, I think it's Ice Cube's character, but definitely with some of the other characters. And it's like, what's the most important thing in life? And one of them says, like, respect. And then another one is like, what about love? And, like, how about God's will, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, necessity. People do what is most necessary to them at any given moment. I guess I just want to know, do you think that's true?
Well, it's an empty statement, I think.
I know, that's what I mean.
Yeah, I don't, because he wrote it, there are reflections of a young David O. Russell's mind. That strikes me as something that I would have keyed into when I was 20. You know, like an adage to walk away from that made me feel like I'd figured life out. But the concept of necessity is it's a relative one. You can have necessity over every necessary thing in your life. The bigger questions are both the values that underpin what you think is necessary, and then the willingness to do what's necessary for those necessities. And that in itself is a fucking cauldron of, right? Psychoanalysis, spiritualism, everything. So I thought
what's necessary to make this podcast a success is what I'm trying to ask, Dave.
Well, that's a good question. And we clearly don't have an answer. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, let's talk about podcasting. You know, what is the word necessary mean in podcasting? It's weird.
Wow.
You know?
Is any podcast really necessary? Probably not. I mean, I think what it's getting down to here is what he's trying to say is that people try to pretty up the language, but really when it comes down to it, when you are tested the exact most, you're going to do whatever's possible to survive, whether that's you and your family, or if you're even more cold and calculated, it'll just be yourself. It's like that preservation almost. You do what's necessary to go on to the next thing, whatever that next thing is. So I think he's just saying, like, let's grab the gold, let's go, let's get out of here. And I think that might be slightly circumnavigated by the end of the movie, but I still think that's how he's living his life. He's just doing what it takes to get to the next step.
You know, actually, like talking this out, I think maybe David O. Russell is smarter than I was giving him credit, because that scene happens before all of the shit goes down, and I wonder if that's just his way of positing a justification that he hears a lot, particularly in capitalist America, of people winning. Right? It's all about winning. It's all about, as long as I'm on top, you know, that I'll do what's necessary. To have the most money, to have the most property, to be the higher ranking boss. And then the movie devolves because, you know, it's not that simple. You know, even making a choice between these townspeople, seeing someone get tortured, coming up, there's men with guns. They're not actually fighting. Like, it's such an awkward conflict until a presumably innocent woman is shot for really no reason. And then, his definition of necessity changes, and it starts to move away from his personal wealth into some kind of social moral good. And even that's murky for all of them. All of them struggle with that. Yeah. You know what's interesting looking back at that too is Marky Mark's character is the one that seems throughout the whole movie to have the hardest time just letting it be about the money. But in the end, he's the one that tries to get away with the money first in that conflict, right? So there is sort of a weird twist there. The only sort of underpinning character is Ice Cube, who's just praying to be part of the flow of whatever's happening, and he's the one that gives it up the easiest. So, now I'm overthinking
it. Just because you brought in the capitalism thing, which you always do, I can't come down one way or the other, because this is the awfulness of social media too, where I think we're going to have to wait for the next 20 years to see if this pans out. But it feels like to me that the younger generation is very much more pushing against this idea of individuality, where it's like, no, we should not be doing things just because it's advantageous to you, the single person. We need to start looking much more to like the greater good. So like you can be successful and also bring up everyone at the same time, bringing people along with you rather than just like stepping on the necks of everyone beside you and in front of you. Again, I don't know. That's just what I feel I see a lot on social media, but who knows if that's actually going to pan out. The hippies basically caused the recession of 2008, so who knows? Well,
I mean, it's like the hippies becoming the yuppies. I think, you know, I can't remember if it's one of our discussions or my discussion with somebody else, but you know that adage about the company you keep. I feel like, you know, you and I share at least a little bit of our Venn diagram of people that we kind of know. Then within the art community, the podcasting community, you know, Matt Mort specifically, and you hang around with all these kids that are, like you're talking about, seem to love each other and want to hang out and high five each other and go to each other's shows and like do all this kind of shit. On the flip side, in this classic sort of American bipartisanship sort of politics, if you actually go on a random Instagram, that really is not the case. I mean, everybody wants to be a celebrity. Everybody believes they're a celebrity in waiting. You know, I was just talking to Helen this morning, not to be too much of a hater, but, you know, I'm back on Instagram now because of the Exposure Studio thing. And as I'm flipping through my feed, I mean, they're friends, but there are people that must spend, I was just getting into the headspace, an exorbitant amount of time posing taking 50, 100 selfies of themselves in particular type of clothing to present themselves in a particular way to an anonymous, ambiguous public, and in the least victim blaming way possible, by presenting themselves that way and objectifying themselves. That is not like what you're talking about. That is not a social statement.
Altruistic.
Yeah, that's not a thing where everybody's holding hands. It can be twisted that way where everybody's like, well, this is body positivity and I can do whatever I want. But, if the filters that I want to show myself in a bikini on the side of a river, like with a filter that my lips get extra swollen, like there's a male bisexualization there that's kind of like, it gets very, very weird.
Whoa, a male bisexualization? What
Biased.
Oh, biased.
Yeah.
I was going to say, what are you throwing me into this for?
So I want to believe, and I think maybe I'll agree as much as this. I think that there is going to be and has a growing community of people that want to support each other, but like the hippies, that idealism will hit a wall because you have to live in this country, be it Canada or the United States or wherever you're listening to this, and that costs money. That money is currently being undermined by not just shitty leaders, but COVID. So who knows in 5 years what that actually means, or 1 year. When the shit hits the fan, in other words, when your mortgage payment or your rent or you need to eat, when these things are all due, idealism, like George Clooney is talking about in this movie, it goes out the window pretty quick. And then the concept of necessity comes in, and then your values come in. So I was watching, did I bring up the Simon Sinek TED Talk in our last episode?
I think you did that a couple episodes ago. Well,
anyways, finite game, infinite game. But at the end of the day, he talks about how if you have values, then you can make decisions that are against your interests. So, if you and I value podcasting, we will at some point be able to make a decision that will not feel right if this is the most important thing we're doing, right? And so I think when these kids are faced with that, we'll see. History will judge.
History has its eyes. Dave, my follow-up question is, who hurt you?
Well, in my mind, everybody. As it turns out, though, Kyle, myself. Yeah, myself. Yeah.
We're done here.
The machinist told us that we have to wrap up, but I think we should end off by asking kind of those two questions we so often do, which is, do you think this movie holds up, and do you think there's any cultural relevance to watching this movie in the year 2020?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was pretty gripping. I didn't find myself having to contextualize or even know it was Gulf War I. This sort of depiction of warcraft has changed, not the video game, but how soldiers are on the ground and what war is like.
Can I just say that is actually a really interesting point you just brought up. I do think that the video game war games and first-person shooters and stuff like that really has changed how war movies are portrayed on screen nowadays. Like, just watch Extraction, for instance, that was out on Netflix here recently. Like, boy, does that owe a lot to first-person shooters. And I'm not even saying that as a good thing or bad thing. I'm just saying that it's changed the way that war is shot. And this felt very standard, 90s war movie type of thing.
I think I read a trivia that because it's David O. Russell, he demanded that the explosion scenes were single takes or something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a asshole. I mean, there must have been so much yelling, in prep because, you're just not in the right place. The social themes we're talking about are still relevant. Is it going to come off? Yeah, I hate to use the word naive here because I don't think it should be. I think these themes are relevant, that like the torture scene, that we need to humanize that. We need to understand that over the last 150 years, I mean, this is historical. So throughout the history of humanity, I mean, if you want to be depressed, read about wars. I mean, this shit is scratching the surface. The stuff that we're upset about now doesn't compare to what people did in the medieval times or pre-biblical times in the concept of torture.
Not to let them off the hook too much, but yes, the depravity that humanity has known throughout the centuries is
something
pretty sick. Yeah,
there's a reason why Shakespeare couldn't pronounce V's. It was a war wound. No,
that's right. It's the Merchant of Venice, everyone.
So I don't know. I mean, I think it should be. I think it should be relevant. It's hard to picture, how an 18-year-old will watch this movie. It feels like, the cinematography, the way it's shot, feels a little bit old person-y. It's not so hip. But I kind of like it for that too. As we've talked about, I hate shaky cam. I hate jump cuts. This has got a little bit of that taste, but I didn't find myself being dizzy from a cinematography and director of photography view. So
yeah, this is a very classically shot film in very many ways, even though there are still some flourishes here and there. I think that it does hold up, and I do think it's still relevant. For how many more years, I don't know. I can't put it in there. I found it increasingly fascinating just because of that connection of like, this was made in 1999, and it feels like it's commenting on the second Iraq War instead of the first. And I think that that's a really interesting idea to bring up. I mean, they bring up Bush's name, they bring up Saddam's name, but they're actually talking about the first Bush, not the second one. So I feel like throughout that, definitely the second Bush's term in office, that this is probably something a lot of people could have gotten a lot of value from. And nowadays, I think it's just one of those, like any war film from like the 60s or 70s, you can look at it and watch it and be like, oh man, like there's some good lessons you can learn from here. But I think it's always going to have, again, your favorite thing is going to feel like a time capsule more than it is like, this is like cutting edge that we're discussing here right now.
I mean, this is just a quick hindsight 2020 thing, but you know what dates this movie? And it's why I forgot about him at all. Fucking Jamie Kennedy. Like, that character is awful. It doesn't make any sense. It's such a 90s slapstick character, but I just remembered him. He's awful in it. Not because of himself as a human being, but the character does, like, they already have an idiot. They've got the redneck. He's playing the role of the fool. And then they added one more who is much worse. So that will date it.
Right.
Yeah, they don't do that as much anymore, unless you're going to go full comedy.
Well, let's get into our ratings. We do rate every movie here out of 5 because the machine demands it. You can look at our entire list over on Letterboxd, letterboxd.com/KDVSTM. So out of 5, Dave, what would you give this movie?
I'm just trying to think how much it's affected by how we're talking about it. I'm going to go with 3 because I don't imagine myself watching this movie again.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a 3.
Well, I am, like I said, I know I'm a little bit more positive on this than you are. I'm giving it a 4 because I think it's strong. Will I watch this again? I think I probably will. It's not going to be soon, that's for sure. Like, it's not going to go into a rotation of mine or anything like that. But I probably would pop this on again just to see if it holds up.
Just to throw in, your Stars free membership doesn't last a couple of years. So if you're going to watch it again, I mean, not that we use Stars, but you probably have to watch it pretty quickly.
So this is so funny. What that means, though, Dave, is that it's tied with a movie. It is tied with The Mummy. It's tied with The Mummy. And what happened here a few weeks ago is happening again. So The Mummy, I gave a 3, you gave a 4. And in this movie, I gave a 4, you gave a 3. So, how are we going to break this deadlock? Let's do rock, paper, scissors. No, convince me that The Mummy should go ahead of Three Kings.
I'm just trying to convince myself right now. I think we did this last week. Which movie are we more likely to watch again?
To be brutally honest, even though I gave it a lesser score, I probably would see The Mummy more.
It's just more fun, right?
It is more fun, yeah.
Which one is structured more intelligently? That'll be the Three Kings, right? So you have to kind of go with entertainment versus pretense. So I'm going to go entertainment because, I'm definitely at this age in particular, I want to be entertained, Kyle. Can you entertain me a little bit?
Yeah, you're weak. I get it. It's fine.
So I'm gonna throw my vote in for The Mummy. How about you? Where do you land on?
I'm agreeing with you. I'm going at the rewatch value more than anything. So I have no problem putting it there. I did this wrong. One second. This is getting cut out.
I'm praying that my audio has that high pitch whine in it because cutting it out, I was getting a headache because I was either, like trying to filter it out and all you hear is the whine.
There's, I hear a whine most of the time when I record with you, but that is just your voice.
Hey-o.
So entering the list then at number 15 is Three Kings. So I said you can go and look at the full list by going to our Letterboxd page. KDVSTM is, of course, also where you can find this on social media, whether it's on Instagram or on Twitter. And if you want to see the beautiful write-ups that Dave does and some of the extra content that we make, you can go over onto our Patreon page, help support us over there, and make this show keep going. Dave, do you want to know what we're doing next week? What we're reviewing next week?
I'm a quiver with excitement.
Never say that word again.
Disgusting.
Again, you have one more word apparently that you have to use before the end of this podcast. I'm going to push this button here. Okay, well, we're going from a pretty bro-y movie, and we're kind of going in the opposite direction. We're watching Girl Interrupted next week.
I still like that movie. There's no way that's held up, but that's like
that's what
first Angelina Jolie, right? One of her first
and
films.
Winona Ryder.
Winona Ryder, yeah, both crazy. It's like Cuckoo's
I
Nest.
have not seen this movie.
Oh.
Yeah, I've not seen this movie.
Well, listen, Kyle, just put this wire around your earlobes. And I'm just going to pick this bag up here, and I'm going to split.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Okay, great.
Yeah. And when you're ready, just turn that dial. Just turn that dial.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'll just turn this dial.